All right, so we're going to start with Jerome Segal, who is a presidential candidate for 2024. He's going to primary President Joe Biden. Uh, good afternoon, Mr. Single.
Hello.
Yeah. I'm gonna start this off. So what is your focus in this presidential election that you're going? What is your goal for outside of winning the
Yeah.
primary, the nomination?
Okay. Well, so let me start back a little bit. I'm both by training a philosopher and a policy analyst. I have a doctorate in philosophy and master's in public affairs. I used to teach at the University of Pennsylvania, and then I switched to policy work and worked for the Congress and then in the executive branch. I've developed, you could say, a new synthesis, political synthesis, or a new political philosophy that I call bread and roses socialism. And in simple terms, you could think of it as a combination of socialism and simple living, or of Bernie Sanders, the 18th century Quakers, and Henry David Thoreau of Walden Pond in the 19th century. And we have a different view about the relationship between economics and the good life, and that big question that doesn't really get asked in America, what's an economy for anyhow?
Mm-hmm.
And we think it's a particularly appropriate question because years ago, of course, going back a couple of hundred years, which is when the whole world started to experience enormous expansion in standards of living, there was universal scarcity. And the purpose of economic activity was largely to overcome that scarcity. Today, the quantity of goods and services that an economy produces, such as the United States, are really unbelievable in relationship to where we were 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And so the question is, in an advanced capitalist society, in a gigantically larger economy, what is an economy for at this point? What do we want to get out of it? And the mainstream answer to that is simply more. It simply focuses on a growing economy, having more output and greater what it tends to think of as human satisfaction from greater levels of consumption. And we think that's a mistaken psychology about people. We believe, as many economists used to talk about, that there's a diminishing utility to levels of consumption as you get more and more of it, that you get to a point at which higher levels of money, higher levels of stuff, and so on actually doesn't improve your happiness or well-being at all. And so we have a very different view, and we would say that the purpose of economic life is actually to increasingly free us from the economy. And so that's, in straightforward terms, it's actually to work less. And productivity, if you think of productivity as the amount of output that can be produced in, let's say, an hour of labor, as productivity goes up, you have a choice. You can maintain the amount of time you work the same, and if productivity goes up 100%, then your output and your consumption, in theory, would go up also 100%. Or, on another extreme, you could take, if your productivity goes up, you could maintain your output and consumption at just where it was, but because productivity has doubled, you can cut your working time in half. And over the history of the United States, increased consumption and increased, you call it leisure time or lower levels of work time, were the two main objectives. And so we went with respect to time from a 12-hour day to a 10-hour day to an 8-hour day. And then we stopped. And that was basically in 1940, we enacted the 8-hour day. And it's remained that way for close to 100 years, while consumption has gone up enormously. I think we're probably, compared to where we were in the 40s, the average person probably consumes 6 times what we did at that point. And another way of looking at it is that if there was no inequality in the United States, of which there's enormous inequality, but if the total amount of our GDP, all of our goods and services, was divided equally, it would come out to something like around $56,000 per person, which would mean that the average family of four would have an income every year of over $250,000. So that's how massive our economy is. So what we need is not a larger economy. We need a fairer economy, a more equal economy. And so that's one of the things that we're for, is greater equality. And that's different from equality of opportunity, which of course we're in favor of equality of opportunity also. But what we're actually in favor of is far greater equality of outcomes. And that's both with respect to income and wealth. And so we've got policies for moving sharply in that direction. But in terms of our overall economic life, we want to see the cost of meeting basic needs significantly reduced. We like to think about the cost of meeting basic needs in terms of time. And we think of, let's say, the work week as broken up into 10 blocks of half-hour days. And so right now we're putting in 10 half-hour days or 5 full days, which is the 40-hour work week. And we think we could reduce the amount of work time that we need, probably to take 3 or 4 of those half-day blocks out of the work week, and thus get a work week that's as low as 3 days a week, which would give people time to do things in life that they find really important, and really meaningful. And so it may be other kinds of work. It may be meaningful activities that they don't get any money from. It may just be putting in much more time with friends and family, both of which are starved. Friendship is starved, and in many ways, family life is starved. So we have overall, we're looking for a more equal economy, an economy with more time, with much less anxiety, much greater security, one in which there would be a focus on education for its own sake, one in which quality of life, beauty, and creativity would expand rather than quantity, and so on. So those are sort of our overall objectives. And going back to your question about the purpose of the campaign, I don't expect to be the next president of the United States. What I would like to do is to get onto the debate stage. And just as someone like Andrew Yang was able to insert, in his case, just one policy.
I was going to ask you about the UBI, and
Yeah, so he inserted UBI into national discussion. He didn't think it up, but it's been around for a long time. But he successfully inserted it into mainstream discussion. Our ambition is to do something much more comprehensive, but to insert this overall perspective of bread and roses socialism and what's an economy for into American political discourse.
Okay.
BIGJ, there's feedback. I don't know where it's coming from.
Okay.
I've been muted.
But okay. Since you bring up Mr. Yang, Mr. Segal, what do you think of the UBI concept? that Andrew Yang was trying to do in 2020?
Well, we're in favor of, I would say, a limited variant of the UBI. Our focus isn't primarily on guaranteeing basic income, but it's actually a concept that we use of guaranteeing basic employment. And so we're in favor of a legal right to a job and a job at a living wage. And a living wage is a complex issue. It's not just a question of raising the minimum wage. It's also about supplementing income and about reducing the cost of meeting needs. But when it
Hmm.
comes to supplementing income, payments from the Treasury to individual households is something that we favor. We already have a very substantial set of transfers that a lot of people are simply unaware of or disconnect from the discussion of UBI. But we have something called the Earned Income Tax Credit, and it's what's called a refundable credit, so that at tax time, if your income is low enough that you don't even have to pay taxes, but your income is low, at tax time, the Treasury Department will send you a check rather than you having to make tax payments. And those earned income tax credits that they will actually send you a tax for, under today's current law, can be over $6,000 a household. Plus, there's a child tax credit,
Hmm.
which add a couple of thousand more. And there are state level variants of this. So we already have a substantial amount of money for low income people that goes in the opposite direction. One of the things that's wrong with the universal basic income is that it's universal. It's not focused on people with need. It gives out the same amount to the entire population, and that increases the cost of it astronomically and
Hmm.
makes it politically unrealistic. I mean, the amount of money that would have to be transferred, and it's also too great an emphasis on just transferring
What,
cash.
what,
There
what,
are multiple ways. If the objective is basically to secure people with the wherewithal for everyone to meet their needs, and even in our case, to meet their needs with less work, what you have to bring into play are probably a half dozen policy instruments. So UBI is both an unrealistic and an overemphasis on one policy instrument, but it can be an important part of the mix. And so that's our perspective on it.
Okay, well, wouldn't you have to change the tax code or the income tax?
Sure, enormously, enormously.
Okay,
That's the major
so
focus.
you would literally change the entire structure of the tax code, the IRS, how taxes are collected in order to fund something like that, or would
Well,
or
in many ways. I mean, we could get into specifics, but yes, we've got both new taxes that we're thinking about and variety of exemptions that would free certain classes of people from paying any taxes altogether. So, for instance, look at property taxes right now,
hmm
which is actually a form of wealth tax. People talk about wealth taxes as being some radical proposal, but actually, people's homes actually are the largest asset for most people. And we have universal property taxes throughout the society, except those property taxes um, have the same tax rate for rich people who have mansions and poor people who have very, very modest homes. So, what we would do is actually eliminate property taxes for modest homes and low income people. And then we'd have a graduated property tax where the more substantial your home, the greater percentage of that value would be changed. So that's a fundamental transformation in the existing wealth tax. And that's
Well,
just one example.
wouldn't that be similar to Henry Georgian tax, the Henry George tax, that the Georgian any tax when he did in the
Well,
late
I mean,
1800s?
it's been a long time since I've focused on Henry George, but he did focus, as I remember, first of all, he believed only in a land tax, that you could raise all the revenues that you need. And he did
Uh-huh.
that at a point in which the view of what government's responsibilities were very modest. So you could not just have a land tax these days.
Can I jump in here a minute, Big J?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, okay, so we have a lot of corporate businesses that are buying up land from other countries. How would you be able to tax them in order to fund this, where you subsidize, income for people that are lower income, and help them with this, I don't know what you call it, this monthly pay, would it be, or would it be yearly, or how would it work?
Well, I mean, if you're only talking about something like UBI, we could talk about it sort of a widening and deepening the earned income tax credit. You could that's one thing, but that's just part of our agenda. A lot of our agenda is on reducing the needs, reducing the amount of money that you need, for instance, to pay for housing, and reducing the amount of money that you need to pay for transportation, which takes up close to a fifth of the household budget and can be reduced enormously. So, I don't want to focus too much just on cash payments from government, because in many ways it's not the most interesting and the most novel thing that we're proposing. It's an expansion of what already exists. But with respect to your question about taxing corporations, I think the single thing to focus on, well, we have two things. One is the question of who owns corporations. So when I talk about a more equal society, part of it has to do with who owns corporations. And if you look at, for instance, corporate stock, what you'll find is that 1% of the population owns a staggering amount of the corporate stock. I don't remember the exact percentage, but it could be 40%, or if you go to the top 10%, it could be 60% of corporate stock is owned by 10%, and that they own more than the bottom 50%, or maybe even the top 1% owns more than the bottom 50%. So what we would actually like to see, and this is a long-term project, but we'd actually like to see fairly equal ownership throughout America of American corporate stock. And so if you're looking at a long-term objective, we envision sort of household stock accounts in which over time, the average household would own pretty much the same percentage of corporate stock as every other one.
Are you aware of how many outside investors from China and Europe and Germany and places like that are buying up properties in America
Well,
at a staggering amount?
a lot of that, and as you said, there's also a lot of American purchases of assets outside the country. But a lot of it, from our point of view, the dominant issue actually is the income of American corporations, as well as the ownership of them. And I don't know that we could, well, maybe we'll think about it, sort of how to deal with the question of ownership of foreign corporations that are in the American market. There may be ways of approaching that also.
Because these investors are basically buying American citizens out of homes where it's to the point where American citizens can't afford the housing market to buy into.
The housing market is a special case, and we have policies on that'll really change the housing market. So if we're talking about that particular asset, so for instance, what we are very interested in is an idea that we developed of the zero interest mortgage. And so for low income people, we're also interested in much smaller and more modest homes. So for instance, the average new home today is three times as large as the average home was in the 1950s, the average new home. And we think that's vastly excessive and an example of unnecessary consumption that has to do with cultural changes and keeping up with the Joneses and how we think of status, but isn't at all related to actually what people's housing needs are. So houses can be constructed at a much more affordable level, and with a zero interest mortgage, people with low incomes could actually be mortgage free of decent housing in 10 years, which would mean that you could buy a house at age 30, and by the time you reach 40, you could have no mortgage payments altogether. And we could supplement that by having the mortgage only pay for the house and having the land actually given to the person for use and owned publicly and given to them through a land trust. So
Would there also be something that would make it easier for, let's say, somebody with a disability or the elderly who actually are on a fixed income, and when it comes to the taxes that they owe for their homes that they can't afford at the end of the year, would
oh,
there be any?
absolutely. In fact, what we talked about, I mentioned it earlier, about the progressive property tax. We'd eliminate property taxes for low-income people.
Okay.
Certainly for people with disabilities. If you had the unusual case of someone with a disability who had a vast amount of inherited wealth, then no, because our focus
But
really.
somebody that's on a fixed income that doesn't have the money to pay those
Sure,
taxes
sure,
every year.
we'd eliminate taxes on that. And the objective really is to achieve equality. And so ultimately, and what we believe in, and this is one of the ways in which we're socialists, is that we believe in the formula uh, from each according to their needs, and to each, I'm sorry, from each according to their ability, and to each according to their needs. And when that translates into tax, the from each according to their ability it translates into from each and according to their ability to pay, their ability to contribute to what the fund that's necessary for our social life. So it would be a highly progressive tax system, and ideally every category of people with low ability to contribute financially would have a significantly reduced or zero tax liability.
Oh, you have a question, Pierre? Because I was about to ask
Yeah,
him something.
I was going to ask him. I was going to ask him. No, go ahead, Big J. No, go ahead.
No, because I was going to shift to education because you said education for Renaissance, and on your website you have all a society in Renaissance is a society of human flourishment and of creative expression. All children are born with such
Yeah,
potential, and you said and later on in the sentence you said every young person master at least one way of adding beauty to the social world. Um, what are your educational policies when it comes to education?
well, first of all, what we would do is make education free from pre-K through college.
Hmm.
So that would just be part of the social contract and just a given. And by the way, I would add that I actually went to a free college, and that was over 50 years ago. And it was an excellent college. It was called City College of New York, and it still exists. And when I went, it was one of a half dozen free, very high quality colleges that were paid for. It was paid for not by the federal government, but actually taxes that were raised by New York City, not even New York State. So,
Hmm.
so this is not even radically new. It's something that existed a half century ago. So that's just one thing, but I think it's very important. The other thing is that we would try to disconnect college schooling from education. So a lot of the discussion that we have about education in the United States today really isn't about education. It's about schooling, which are really two different things. And what we want to do is return schools really to education. And I'd say sometimes I talk about education for its own sake. And by that, I'm contrasting it to education in order to equip you for a higher paying job. And most people these days, both in the public discourse and in their own lives, think about certainly about going to college, but even sometimes it starts with parents in the middle class actually looking out for their children starting in daycare, but
Mm-hmm.
thinking about, how do you get on the right career track? And you've got these horrible things happening in our society, such as young children beginning to think about their resume at astonishingly early ages, or really horrible developments. For instance, I don't know if you read any of this literature, but sometimes Asian students have been told that when it comes to interviews to get into good colleges, they're not viewed as having a sufficiently effusive personality. So they start taking preparatory courses in having more effusive personalities. And so we have a horrible distribution, not distribution, we have a horrible set of cultural practices and distortions in life and personality that are going on because of this pursuit of a limited number of high status jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
so our most fundamental objective, and this goes to the reduction of the work week, is to actually transform the culture so that your status and your self-respect is not tied to how you earn your money.
Right. Right.
And if you want to understand how much it is, think for yourself this little question. Okay, let's say you've gone to college, and after a few years, you run into an old college roommate, right? And let's say you're a guy, or let's say you're a young woman, right? And you ask her, she tells you that, oh, by the way, I'm getting married, and you ask her, who are you marrying, right? And she might say, he's a lawyer, or he's a stockbroker, or he's a doctor, or she might say he works in the A&P. He bags groceries. Okay, but what that question, "Who are you marrying? Who is he?" is a question about how does he earn his money? What does he do for a living, right? And the answer that's given gives you, a picture of this guy's status and how well she has done. Now, in a world in which every job provides people with enough money to meet their needs, and it does it in 3 days a week, personal identity will not depend primarily on what you do in the 3 days. It'll depend on what you do in the other 4. So the guy who answers, well, I bag groceries in the supermarket, actually could be a novelist, or he
Right.
could be working 4 days for the church, or he could be a revolutionary, or he could be an artist. But you don't know what his identity is by asking, how do you make your money? Because every job will be enough money to meet your needs. And he might be working in the grocery store because it's a short walk from home, or he might be working there because it's mindless, and it gives him an opportunity to compose his stories or his songs while he's running stuff up in the cash register. So when you divorce personal identity from social identity, and social identity from how you make your living, you've got a new society. In fact, you've got, in a different sense of the term than Marx has talked about it, but in some ways in a more powerful sense, you've got a classless society. And that pervades everything, and it pervades education, you see, because the point of education no longer is to get the high status position,
Mm-hmm.
because high status is not something that comes to you in virtue of getting into a certain kind of school or earning a certain kind of income, which is only available to a small number of people. And also, of course, we want to equalize incomes. So there'll be vastly more, even in the narrow sense of what's a good job, there'll be vastly more of them. So there won't be that kind of scarcity.
Right.
Can I can I ask him also?
Education.
All right, Pierre, go ahead. Go ahead. You gonna
Okay,
ask?
so when it comes to education, because I've raised two daughters,
Yeah.
and my two daughters I have three grandbabies right now, and a lot of parents are very scared about putting their children in public schooling. They're scared of, of violence, and they're scared of teachers, being predatory against their children. Do you think that it would be more cost effective for the United States to do virtual education when it comes to certain things like math, science, or not math, reading, and all the basic things. But when it comes to science, do you think it would be more cost effective to take field trips when it comes to science projects and learning things like that are hands-on when it comes to the medical field and things like that, but be able to stay home when it comes to English, vocabulary, math, and all those different things that you don't need to really be in a classroom for? Would it be cheaper for the United States to do that than public schools?
Yeah. Well, a lot of different contrasts, I mean, that you're making. I mean, usually there's a public-private school contrast, but you're making the contrast between learning in a classroom with other young people and children versus being taught by your parents or through television at home, and that's a different kind of contrast. Um, I
No,
actually,
I'm saying like having a virtual teacher, like on a Zoom, where the
yes,
teacher can have, she can have so many people, and then because it is virtual, anybody student that needs help can get assistance from other like educators that can tap into the live stream and help them with their homework, and it be more effective also, that the teacher doesn't have 40, 50 students that she can't, you
yeah.
know
Well,
get to.
let me give you my answer to it, which is first of all, and this goes to actually our whole approach to the policy, which is we separate means from ends or values from how you get there. Okay, so on a value orientation, we're pretty clear about what we want to achieve. So with respect to education, as Jay mentioned, one of the things that we see as a hallmark of a good education is having the ability in some arena to contribute to the beauty of the world. And another thing that we view as a hallmark of a good education is a love for books. And a third is the ability to access the wealth of the accumulated civilizations of the world, both across cultures and in our own culture going back centuries and centuries. And we believe that, we're very lucky to come at a certain point in civilization when there's an extraordinary wealth that's there and you need education in order to access it. It's sort of as if you're born with a trust fund, but you haven't been told that you have it, and you haven't been told what the account number is. And
Hmm.
education is one of the ways in which you can access incredible wealth of human life and enrichment of human life. So those are some of our what we mean by education. Now, in terms of how to school people, methods of schooling that result in that education, we're open-minded, and
Mm-hmm.
so and we're experimental. So the things that you mention, and you say, don't you think that this will be more effective? I don't know. I'm willing to experiment and see.
The reason why I say that is because the student is in their own environment where they already feel comfortable. Hopefully they have a loving home with loving parents, so they feel comfortable, and they
Well,
don't
I don't
feel.
know. I think that's as a general assumption. I think that's a false assumption. I think that parents. I don't know how. Maybe they're generally loving, but maybe they're not. But they certainly don't have. Most parents are working, and some
Mhm.
kids have one parent who's definitely working, and they're not available to play that role. But the other thing that I would stress is the importance of interacting with other people as well as interacting with teachers And I mentioned earlier, for instance, that by training I'm a philosopher. When I think back about the best times of my, let's say, undergraduate education, um, it was in my undergraduate philosophy classes, arguing with other students over fundamental issues like what is the good life? And it was being able to develop your own views in the course of argument. It wasn't a question of
Well,
winning
I
the
mean, we do that on the internet. We get in groups and people have their discussions, and they go one turn at a time, and they still have like very
yeah,
fulfilling, meaningful discussions without
yeah,
actually having to physically be there. We can
yeah.
have
So that,
discussions with somebody
that's
that's
what
in
I
another
mean
country.
about that's what I mean about being open-minded. So I don't want to
Hmm.
rule it out. My experience is that I'm familiar with the benefits of um, standard approaches. I'm not familiar experientially, being an old guy, with the kind of things that you're talking about. Um, but I'm open to,
Because the reason why I
listening.
bring this, because we're always talking about where we can cut funding. And one thing that you can cut is you can cut out the schools where you don't have to upkeep the schools. I mean, you can have a minimal school, like a smaller school when it comes to
Yeah,
certain classes like science, where you need to get in there and you actually have to physically be hands-on, right?
well,
Or,
let me put
you
it
know,
this way. I don't know what more to tell you in an answer. I'm agreeing with you that what you're saying may be true. I'm telling you that I myself haven't experienced it, and I'm telling you that I'm open-minded
mhm.
to being convinced, and that's all I could say about it.
Okay. Um. Okay. Like I live in Texas, right? In most states, that like the old Confederacy, right? So some states were like they like in Texas, for example, we spent $6,000 per student, while we spent 45 to 65,000 per prison inmate. What is your approach to criminal justice and criminal justice reform, and how would you shift the inmates into be more productive citizens?
Yeah, well, something that's sort of relevant to what we just talked about,
Right.
is is how we conceive of what prison is, or the
Hmm.
class of people that you're talking about as inmates. And one thing that I would say is that the younger someone who commits a crime is, two things. One, the more it's the case that we want to attribute their criminality to their environment. And what I mean by that is not only their economic and social environment, but the environment of their home and other people that they were brought up with, and so on. The more those are the factors that increase criminality than it is the person that they've developed into, which, let's say, is character, which is something that gets molded uh, through a lifetime of experience. But people don't start out. No baby starts out predisposed to criminality.
Right.
Well, that's the first thing. And what that means is that the younger a person is, the more it's the case that society has an opportunity um, to reverse the adverse effects on their behavior and, let's say, on their developing character than they have with older people. And it may be that the first crimes that people commit or are arrested for may turn out to be the last time that society has a real chance of setting people on a very different direction. So that has to do with perspective on how we focus, how we approach someone who might be caught up in the criminal justice
So
system. The other
so.
thing, let me just say, it has to do with what happens to people,
Mhm.
and the idea of that ultimately people will be returned to society, and what the imprisonment experience is. So I think the imprisonment experience for most people who go through it tends to result in their becoming more likely to commit crimes when they come out
Right.
than they were previously. So it's an incredible failure of the whole system. And what we have to have is totally different criteria for what success is there, and totally different kinds of institutions in order to create that other definition of success. And I would
So
say that they have to become much closer to educational institutions than to penal institutions.
I
Right.
agree,
One
because
example,
I feel like they go into prison and learn how to be a better criminal
yeah,
because it's like a school for criminals.
that's right. What could be more insane than that? What could actually, and then we turn them back into society,
Right.
and
Right.
we've done them harm, and we've done ourselves harm. So it's crazy. It's really crazy. And also, one of the things that's really wrong is that we think about, what are they going to do when they get out? And the big thing that they face, among other things, is how are they going to earn an income and how are they going to get a job? Well, I think
Right.
that's wacko. I think they should be employed while they're in prison with real jobs. And certainly what we're learning today, with the amount of work that you can do at home, is that probably half of the labor market would be open to people who are in prison. And so, and with institutional help and special programs and so on, there's not any reason why anybody who's in prison couldn't have a real job when they're in prison. And because they're in prison, their consumption level would be much less than otherwise. And so they would save a lot of money. And they might come out of money with us out of prison, both with skills, with experience, and a substantial bank account that would allow them to have their own home and to live in a decent neighborhood and bring up a family. And so
So
that's
are you suggesting teaching them like a trade in like electrical trade, construction trade, or whatever, something like that while they're in prison?
but it doesn't have to be. They could become teachers. They could become nurses. It's really quite
I
wide
don't think too
open what
many
they
parents would want a convicted, violent, you know, ex convict to be teaching their kids. But I'm
Yeah, I
saying,
mean, no, it has to be appropriate, but everything has appropriateness. So maybe that wouldn't be it. But maybe you have a young person who committed a violent crime with a weapon and is sentenced to 20 years, and didn't even graduate from high school and grew up in a violent household, and so maybe this person, through a whole series of programs could actually become a very loving individual, could finish high. In fact, I know somebody. He actually ran for mayor of Baltimore, right? And you know what? When you had to put down when we applied, no, he ran for senator. It was in the Senate race. He ran for senator in Maryland, right? His name
Hmm.
is Ricky Vaughn, right?
I,
And when
I,
you
I heard I heard of him. I heard of him.
and when you put down, when you listed sort of who you are in one word, you know what he put down? I put down Jerome Segal, philosopher, right? He put down Ricky Vaughn, felon. Right? He listed felon. And
Hmm.
then he had a life story, which was that, he was arrested as a teenager and served time, and then ultimately he not only completed high school and college and became a businessman and actually owns now a chain of fast food places. And he was actually, when I met him, he was enrolled in law school and had a happy marriage. So, so all sorts of things are possible. And so, yeah, he wasn't your average guy. And, it was sort of an absurdity, a stupid thing that he was, sucked into an armed robbery.
his story is pretty much the diamond in the rough, but you
Yeah, but
have people who are perpetual
there may be
offenders.
a lot of people in between him and the example that you gave. That there may be 75% of the population may fall in between those extremes.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. Well, so it seems though like that your approach to criminal justice is similar to state rep Jordan Harris, who wrote that the clean slate law in the next state of Pennsylvania. Are you aware of the clean slate law of Pennsylvania? Because it
No,
seems
no,
okay.
no.
Well, it's kind of similar where where the inmates, once they get out there, some of the, some of their sentences will not show up on
Oh,
I
their.
mean, I understand that for people that do burglary because their resources are they don't have resources, or somebody that maybe had a marijuana charge or something like that. Yeah, I get that. But when people have actual, like a predator, like a child pedophile, like I wouldn't want that person at all in a school with children ever.
yeah, yeah. I basically agree with that. I basically agree with that. But if people actually have real jobs while they're in prison, that's so different, and it makes such a difference with the question of their record. Because one of the things that's really wrong with this, with the idea of a prison record. Well, first of all, what prison is will make it far less a matter of stigma. Just the fact that you serve
So
time. It might be
so
viewed,
so
well, let me just finish. It might
okay.
be
I'm sorry.
viewed
I'm
as,
sorry.
that you were in a certain kind of educational institution. But secondly, the fact that you have a work record, and you may actually, when you come out of prison, not just have a work record, you may actually be on a job, and you'll be going with the same employer that you've actually been working for the last 10 years, to working for him outside of prison. So the question, and he'll know your record from the very beginning. So the whole issue that's involved in the clean record legislation will take on a vastly diminished character with the kind of reforms I'm talking about.
Okay. Well, okay. So I'm gonna move on to the next subject.
Yeah.
But so are you when it comes to education and criminal justice, are you trying? Or when it comes to criminal justice, are you trying to put a psychology of a perspective mindset into the criminal justice system?
Sure,
Be a psychologist first,
sure.
rather than being
I mean,
corrected
if what you're
second.
talking about, if broadly what you're talking about is people coming out of prison um, with character growth rather than
Hmm.
criminality growth, you've got to know something about character growth. So,
Right.
it may be one-on-one. My guess is that I mean, sometimes we talk about the whole population in America having mental health problems, but you can be sure uh, that the need for mental health development is enormous with the prison population. So, of course, if you view that, and especially if you view it as a social justice issue, and not just, well, how does society protect itself against repeat criminals, but you view criminality among young people as reflecting pre-existing social justice, then equipping them with more services that will compensate for what was impoverished in their prior environment is also a social justice issue.
Okay. Uh, Period. You got anything to say? Because I'm gonna
Yeah,
move on.
I have something to say before children get into the criminal justice system at all. I think that there needs to be an evaluation for a lot of children. They suffer a lot of abuses at home. They suffer a lot of abuses with family members. It's not spoken of, and they hold all these things in. And I get what you're saying about the psychology of everything, but I think that a lot of these children, first they need to be taken, or the environment they're in needs to be corrected 100%. There needs to be more funding to help children from day one of birth up until they even get into the criminal system. They have to be nurtured and taken care of, and we need people to make sure that the children that are being brought into this world are being loved and cared for, and
Well,
that is part of the
I agree
problem.
with you, but I would link that together with what you were talking about the great advantages of kids not going to school and spending time at home with a digital program. Um, because I think that the likelihood that you're going to change the real character of the family and inside, in the few years in which we're dealing with a very young child, um, I think that's overly ambitious. And so I would think that, and especially since a staggering amount of the awake time of children is spent at school, and because teachers often are the only adults that children see in addition to their parents, and they also see them at work, I think that what happens in the school environment is enormously important for the development of children. And when they come out of abusive homes, the idea that, let's say between the first grade and the fifth grade, you're going to successfully transform the nature of that family and their parents and so on.
The reason why I say that is because if you have a virtual student, you can kind of see the climate of the household. You're going to be able to a teacher that's online is going to be able to see a lot of the climate, and even even if law enforcement peeked in.
How are they going to see what happens when the parent comes home? Let's say the parent had a bad day and takes it out.
Well, I mean, they can kind of see how the house is run, and a lot of parents aren't working. When you're talking about very low income children, their parents are not really working. They don't have the skills to work, so they're there.
Yeah. Well, as I said before, I'm skeptical, but I'm willing to be convinced. So, let's do the studies, let's do experiments, and if you're
I would offer virtual school to the parents that are scared or fearful of their children going to schools, and offer that to them first.
I get it. You're a major advocate of virtual schooling. I'm not, but you may be right. I don't know what more, as I said, I don't know what more to tell you. You can keep on saying how great it is, and I'll keep on saying I'm open to being shown. But I think we're going to go round and round on that one.
Okay. Well, okay. So I'm gonna shift it to something else though. The president of the United States, your opponent. It seems that there was a law passed where Social Security, that Ukrainian refugees are receiving Social Security funds. Are you aware of that?
No.
Okay, I think there was a law passed. I think about 2 months ago, and
There wasn't a law. There wasn't a law passed. It was that that the Democrats and the Republicans both agreed to fund the Ukrainians that come over here, and how they're funding them is dipping into Social Security.
I'm not aware of that. I'm surprised to hear that.
Okay, yeah. I'll try to send you the email of this. Yeah. I think this report. I think that thing came out recently. That's
the thing I wanted to say too, because I've had a big discussion, and I don't feel it's okay for the American government to go and fund other nations when they're not taking care of the nation that they're supposed to be in charge of in the first place. When you have a big, huge homeless population all over the United States and many cities, and you're not even taking care, like the vets were promised to be taken care of, they haven't been. We have a big, huge homeless population, but you're allowing Ukrainians to come over here, and it's nothing against Ukrainians, because everybody needs help when they need help. But I have a problem when we have a government that cares more about people outside of the United States than they do people inside the United States. That's the thing I have a problem with.
Yeah, well, as I say, everything has to do with proportion. So, it's clearly the case that the United States can't take care of everyone. But the idea that we can't help out anyone outside the United States because we have problems inside the United States, I think both is morally wrong, but also it's got an assumption that if we weren't helping Ukrainians, or if we weren't giving foreign aid, that somehow we'd be doing more about homelessness or inner cities. And that's not the way America works. That's the broken part about our government. That is absolutely the broken part about our government. You cannot. Yeah, and that's right. What we would do is we'd have a tax cut for the rich to save money on that. And my guess is that, if I know this for a fact because I used to work in the foreign aid program, but Americans have a staggeringly inflated conception of the percentage of our budget that we actually spend on helping people outside the country on funding.
Israel has gotten something like $23 trillion, I think it is,
No,
over the course.
but it's huge. Israel is one of the issues. My probably primary issue that I've worked on are Israel and the Palestinians. And I did work in the USAID office that oversaw its aid. What Israel gets today is $4 billion a year, which is, if you break it down by Israeli family, it actually comes to something like $1,500 per Israeli family. So that is staggering. But it's also the case that, that by a factor of probably 10 to 1 or 20 to 1, or 30 to 1 or 50 to 1, that exceeds what we're giving to all other countries in the world. So
but it's $1,500. Not even a welfare parent gets $1,500 in aid.
That 1,500 is excessive
in America.
What I'm saying is that if we're having a conversation that's general about the principle of whether America is giving too much money to people in need who are not American citizens, you can't advance that argument by talking about the one wild exception from what we're actually giving. So yes, you're right about Israel, but Israel's irrelevant because
no, I understand that, but my point is you don't take care of. It's like being in a town, and you got somebody that's giving to all the people in the town, but their children are at home starving. Like, well, you don't do that.
Yeah, but you're talking about starving, okay? I'm talking about a fat society that has a lot of fat cats in it, and it's both ignoring the needs in its society, and you're saying that it's paying too much attention when it's paying very little attention anyhow to the needs outside the society. So I don't get it.
So how would you fix the homeless problem in America?
The homeless problem in America, I would build homes. And it's a supply problem primarily, is that we don't have really inexpensive homes for people to live in. And that's why I'm talking about, free land and zero interest loans, and then social services programs that allow people to transfer from either living on the street or living in exorbitant rental housing. But I would like to see us have as a goal that that no matter what your income level, you have the wherewithal to live in a house the size of the new houses in the 1950s and be mortgage free within 10 years.
Are you aware there's a tiny house movement where people?
I am,
okay.
And I like it, but it doesn't have to just be a tiny house. I lived a lot of my time in a house that was 700 square feet, and had a very rich family life in that. Well, the average home today is 4 times that size. It's 2,800 square feet for the average new home today, right? Well, people don't need that. And if a home is a quarter of the size and land is free, the cost of a new home will probably be about 15% of what a new home costs today, and so you'll be able to pay off that mortgage on a minimum wage.
I watched the tiny house movement go from people being able to build a really beautiful tiny house for under $10,000 to now it's over $70,000 for a tiny house.
Yeah, well, that doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way, and we could subsidize it. And it's not just building a tiny house. It's also where it gets built. And like in Maryland, where I am in Montgomery County, they've passed legislation for, I forget what the term that they use for it, but what it actually is, it's a change in permitting, which is very important in the housing market. And
Right.
it allows, I think it's called maybe an accessory home, and it allows people to put up on their own property a small extra house that they won't live in and that they won't use. So and it'll provide them with incentives to do that, and you can massively increase the number of small, tiny, and accessible homes by changing the zoning that allows that, because there are a lot of people who are horrified by homeless, and there are a lot of people, very decent people in America, who would like to do something for other people.
Right.
And so I think, with some creative policies, we can do all sorts of things that we haven't done. And in many ways, I think we're not really trying. I
No,
think
we're not.
that's the answer to why do we have so many people?
Private people that care about what's happening in the homeless population are actually making tiny home communities where they might buy like an acre of land and be able to put 20 to 30 tiny homes on that acre of land for people. And that's 20 people that are out of the streets, not homeless anymore.
That's right. Or you could do duplexes and have 40.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Because
So
everybody that's homeless doesn't have everybody. Yeah, they might have some mental issues after they get out there and they've been homeless for many, many years. But initially, when they start out, a lot of them, aside from people that had already had mental issues and they're medicated for in the first place, who don't want to actually be in a home, there's psychological issues, but a lot of people don't have those psychological issues. They want to.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that, and I agree with you. I agree with you. And it's also the case, even if people do have psychological issues, being on the street rather than being in your own home makes an enormous difference in your mental health.
Yes, the safety, because a lot of those people don't have safety when they're laying in the street.
Or dignity.
all right. I'm gonna ask you to. I'm gonna shift to another topic here. I got two more topics, but I'm gonna shift to this one. There's this growing movement within the African American community about reparations.
Reparations.
Yeah. Would you agree with it? And if so, how would you implement that such policy?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So in principle, the answer is yes. I mean, I
Okay.
think that, and we're talking about reparations for slavery.
Right.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, yeah. The starting point is that the background of slavery in the United States is the most shameful and extraordinarily shameful thing about our national experience. Okay. So that's got to be the basis of it. The second thing is that it was much more extreme and much worse than we understand, especially than the white community understands. So it goes to this issue of wokeism. Well, the truth is that most Americans need to be educated about our own history.
They do.
These people who talk about wokeism are essentially know-nothings who actually want to advance and promote know-nothingism. So, we used to talk in America religiously about something called the Great Awakening. Well, in terms of understanding our history, America needs a Great Awakening. So that's the starting point. Okay. Then the other question.
America needs an awakening, not only to Black culture in America and history, but also to every immigrant that came from every Asian country, Hispanic country, and what they come to do or what lives they have lived. We have no respect for people that don't look like us in America. There's a mechanism, just like, classism. There's a mechanism for racial culture that is not being respected in America for other people. We never have.
Absolutely. And it's not just racial, by the way. Like, we have a whole history of persecution of the other. So there was a point in American life when the society was overwhelmingly white Protestants, and Irish Catholics had a terrible time coming into the United States without being discriminated against and having low status, and being channeled. They were channeled. A lot of them were channeled straight from the boats into the Civil War.
Yeah.
Where immigrants being channeled straight from the boats into sweatshops and taken advantage of. And some of that immigration, when it was open, was designed to have a cheap, exploitable labor force. But slavery is unique. Slavery really is unique, both in the quantity of it and our background. So on reparations, first of all, it's a very complex issue in terms of how to do it. My orientation is much towards social and economic changes and multi-generational response than it is towards anything like a cash payment. I don't think you can pay someone. And then you've got a question of generations. So what if you pay this generation? What about the next generation? Because the impacts of slavery, don't stop with one generation, whether you pay them or not. But fundamentals and reparations, at least some of the things were originally thought about in terms of land. And something that happened in Reconstruction was that there was a redistribution of the plantations of the rich Southerners to freed slaves. Well, today we don't have an agricultural economy, but what we do have is one in which education serves as a major determinant of what people's income is, just the way land did. As it's sometimes referred to as human capital as distinct from social capital. So, for instance, some of the things that we've been talking about, which is free education, K through college, or maybe you'd go reparations, maybe you'd extend it to graduate school. So that would be something in terms of human capital. That would be an enormous transfer. That could be viewed as a form of reparation.
Would you add something like baby bond for descendants of slaves?
As a vehicle, but the baby bonds sometimes are thought of as sort of enabling people to pay for college. So if you make college free, they don't have that purpose, but they may have a purpose of allowing people to buy their own homes. We have another program for allowing people to buy their own homes. So
that would be a great reparation for people that don't own and they're renting. That would be like the best you could get. Like, honestly, that would be an awesome thing to get.
Well, start over, because you were talking over me and I didn't hear what you said.
I was saying that giving homes to the descendants of slaves who are impoverished or very poor and could never afford them would be one start to fixing that problem for that wealth gap that's in America, and helping them to maybe giving them that free education you talked about. Maybe they can do an urban garden and learn how to do all these different things to sustain. You know what I'm saying?
I do, and I agree with you.
Okay. And the next thing is we'll transition from the African American community to the Hispanic community. We got land grant issues where a lot of Hispanic families have lost land in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. How would there be a similar program for them as well?
In principle, yes. I flashed on. I don't know if you've seen the series called 1923.
I ain't caught up with it yet. So.
I've been watching it.
Yeah, I think it's great. But one of the things that it does talk about is the way in Texas this white family succeeds in taking this enormous tract of land away from this family that today we would talk of as Latino, but they came out of a Spanish Mexican tradition,
Mm-hmm.
um, and and then the land that turns out has oil underneath it. So so what you're talking about is the land of one wealthy family that was in the 10th of 1%, in 1923, and taking that and giving it to another family that's in the white 10th of 1%. Now that's
Mm-hmm.
very unusual. I agree. It's very
Okay.
unusual. But I just say that because, at least in my orientation, I not always, but I primarily want to talk about privilege and disadvantage rather than just talking about race or ethnicity.
Right.
Right.
And I mean, there were black people who were slave owners, and there were American Indians who were slave owners. So we don't ever talk about that, but it's just another part of the mix.
Okay. Anything else you guys say, Pierre? 'Cause I'm about to go to the second, the last half of this interview. So you got anything else to say, Pierre?
Probably not on that topic, but on other topics, so you can continue.
Well, you know what? Let me bring up one little topic up. What is your opinion, since Pierre here? What is your opinion on Roe v. Wade and the case was the Casey case that I think that's the Dobbs case that ended Roe v. Wade? What's your opinion on the pro-choice, birth control,
Yeah.
uh, reproductive rights?
Well, to my mind, there are two different issues here.
Okay.
One is what do I think about abortion and the state, and then the second, to me, is what do I think about how to deal with the Supreme Court and these big issues on it.
Uh-huh.
And on abortion, I think first of all, there's a broad consensus in America that I agree with, which is that there's an enormous difference in terms of, from a moral perspective, what abortion is at the beginning of a pregnancy and what it is at the end of a pregnancy. So I think overwhelmingly, not the necessarily what we call the pro-life movement, but most Americans agree that in the first weeks of pregnancy, there should be no governmental restrictions on abortion. And most Americans agree that abortion is wrong in the last weeks of pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Okay.
But
So
that can't be off the table for women that have like that there's issues that before you get to the last 2 months, that either there's a lot of times doctors know there's some serious medical issues with that woman. Let's say in the second trimester, you cannot take abortion off the table for those type of instances. Those type of instances are left to the mother, the father, and the doctor for health. And nobody should be getting involved in that. However, nobody's really trying to abort at the last trimester. That's ridiculous.
Lay out my position. Okay. So the starting point is that on the extremes, there's a consensus from a moral point of view, and from a legal point of view, actually, and I agree with that. I also think, and here's where my philosophical background comes in, is that where you draw the line, both morally and legally, as to what's right when it transfers from what's right or what's legal to what's wrong and what's illegal, is relatively arbitrary. That unless you have a view that the soul starts at conception and then all abortion is a destruction of the soul of a person created by God. But if you don't seriously believe that, and very few people, no matter what they say about their religiosity, actually believe.
I believe in God in creation, but I also
Yes.
believe that certain mothers or certain women should never be parents. I mean, you have women that murder their children after birth. Like I just watched a video where this woman got custody of her 7 or 6-year-old son, and she had mental issues, and the state, CPS gave her the child, and she shot her son. Like there's certain women that I don't believe should ever be mothers. And if they don't want to be mothers, I don't want to force them to be mothers.
Yes, well, that's right. But the point is that if you actually believe that the soul is created at conception, then abortion is murder, and we've got a problem of people who shouldn't be mothers. But just if you believe that it's murder, then just as you wouldn't use the factor that they shouldn't be mothers to justify murdering a 2-month-old child, if you believe that a fetus.
I personally believe that whatever soul is meant to enter this world is coming, whether it's through that woman's womb or another woman's womb. That's how I believe. I believe there's no stopping a child that's destined to be here.
Excuse me, someone's knocking on the door here. Wait.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Hello, Naomi?
Yes. Can you hand me the folder on the desk that says Cynthia?
It says what?
Cynthia, the folder to your left.
Yeah, here it is.
I'll put him on mute real quick.
Put him on mute. You just for a minute, so people don't know his business.
Yeah, I'll put him on mute for a minute. Mr. Segal. Yeah, I'm put you off mute. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. I put
you on mute so people couldn't hear what was going on with.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
I would say one thing about the Supreme Court decisions. I think we should amend the Constitution so as to take the Supreme Court out of this. I mean, that would be my response to
the codify it.
Is weighed on constitutional issues, and I think we should amend the Constitution so that there's a right to personal privacy, which in the overturning of it, I mean, that was the basis for not being able to prohibit abortions before the fetus or the growing baby was viable outside the womb, was that there was a personal right. And then the justices of the Supreme Court, by a majority, said that they didn't find that right in the Constitution. So I think we should amend the Constitution to put it in there.
Okay, I agree with that. Now I'm looking at your. So I'm gonna make some last topic.
Yeah.
Is your Israel, Palestine, Iran policy, and then you wrote another policy said no eating the Pizza Act.
Right.
Can you can you please explain what are those two policies?
Yeah. Okay. So let me start with the pizza.
All right.
So, Palestinians have a very good sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that's the case is that, they've been negotiating with Israel since 1993, right? Which is 30 years. 30 years was the signing of what's called the Oslo Accords.
Right.
And it was then that, people like Yasser Arafat were allowed to come back from Tunis, and the PLO, which had been viewed as a terrorist organization, was now viewed as a partner of peace. And the PLO was on the White House grounds, and Arafat shook hands with the Prime Minister of Israel as Bill Clinton's guest. I was actually on the White House lawn at that point and witnessed.
Rabin, wasn't it? Prime Minister Rabin?
Exactly, yeah, Yitzhak Rabin. And so for 30 years, we've been involved in a peace process and a quest for negotiations. And from the Palestinian point of view, what they did, actually it was more than 30 years ago, 35 years ago, they accepted the two-state solution as a resolution. Before that, they were opposed to living at peace in a separate state alongside of Israel. But they accepted that in 1988, and then they experienced that as what the outcome of this 30-year peace process would bring. During that process, every Israeli government actually constructed Jewish settlements, that is, new Jewish communities, over what's called the Green Line. And the Green Line separates Israel from the West Bank. And all of that from 1948, the war in which Israel was established, to 1967 was ruled by Jordan. And then when the peace process started, it was believed that the Palestinians would come to have sovereignty over this West Bank, which Jordan had previously claimed. Okay, and so it's very important to keep that West Bank open for a Palestinian state. But what's happened in over the years is that Israel has increasingly put Israeli citizens and these communities into the West Bank. And so today there are something like 450,000 Israelis who live in the West Bank in these communities, have a significant chunk of the West Bank and a very significant chunk of the resources, in particular water resources there. So what Palestinians say sometimes is that, so for 30 years, we've been having negotiations with Israel over a pizza. And during those 30 years, they've been eating the pizza. And they say that to indicate both how bad things have gone, but also how stupid their own leadership is. And leadership is viewed by many people as illegitimate and having pursued strategies that were downright stupid. And of course, to negotiate for 30 years with someone over a pizza while they're eating it is sort of the epitome of idiocy. So that's sort of the joke. And I named this No Eating the Pizza Act. And what I would have, we would go back to the $4 billion of aid a year that Israel gets from the United States. And the primary thing that legislation would do is it would make that aid conditional, among other things, on a halt to any further Israeli settlement activity in the West Bank. And I'm not sure if it was in this act that I proposed or in further legislation, but I also thought that the United States should establish programs that would provide incentives for the existing settlers to move back into Israel. So there would be a reverse flow that would increasingly make more likely the two-state solution, which I believe is the only source of a peaceful resolution. The only way to peacefully resolve the conflict is with an independent Palestinian state. And for that to ever be agreed on, the size of that Palestinian state would have to be the same as all this land that was over what they call the Green Line, which was the arms line.
Can I ask a question on that topic?
War, yeah.
Would the United States be also give funding to Palestinians at $1,500 per family like they do Israel?
I'd be in favor of it. I doubt that it would be that high. And
because if you're talking about equality for people, you can't be giving and funding Israel and then not funding the Palestinians. That's unevenly yoked when it comes to helping them with their state. So if we actually care about it.
Actually, my proposal is a little bit different. I'm not looking for equality of funding. I actually would transfer funding from Israel to the Palestinians.
Oh, great idea.
And I would gradually zero out funding for Israel. You know, Israel's actually a very wealthy country, and they don't need American funds. The size of the Israeli economy is around $400 billion a year, which means that the $4 billion a year that we give Israel is 1%. Just 1% of their total economy. You know, it would be from the point of view of the government budget. If the government takes in a third of the Israeli, takes in a third of the Israeli economy, you'd only have to compensate for this third. So it's very small amount of money that's involved here, but it would be very meaningful for the Palestinians. And
Definitely.
So I actually have a book on this, and I actually propose that the level of compensation to the Palestinians be set at $4 billion a year, adjusted for inflation for 100 years. So it would be a total of $400 billion adjusted.
Right, because
So it's an enormous proposal.
right.
Yeah.
In the 1950s, Harry Truman, who was he was out the White House, he did a TV special where I don't know if you saw it. It was at the Truman Library. He did where he had a plan for build a dam, not a hydroelectric dam in Palestine. Well, with the land that's Israel now have, where it powers everybody, including the Palestinians, the Jordanians, and people in Israel. Power. Would you favor a construction of a hydroelectric dam from the Mediterranean to the what's that sea, the Jordan?
Big J, you beat me to my punch on my next question to him about having renewable energy in America plus salinization for the states that have droughts, like severe droughts.
Oh, you know what? Let's add on to that since you brought that up. I forgot about
Right.
that. Well, what say you on both those questions, though, sir?
Well, they're totally different questions, and one's sort of a climate change question, and one is an Israeli one. With respect to Israel, you'd have to tell me what's the river inside of Israel that has the capacity for being a hydroelectric dam. There was a proposal for such a dam in Jordan.
Right, right.
And the U.S. actually did contribute to that project, and that was good. I don't know what happened to it. I maybe it even exists today, but I haven't followed it.
I can almost bet it's because it was religiously stopped, because you're talking about what they consider sacred waters over there. They're not trying to mess.
I never heard of that issue with respect to this dam. But in any event, I'm in favor of dealing with both energy issues and water issues as part of the effort to solve the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. And the electricity issues are very important with respect to Gaza, which gets, I think, almost all of its power from Israel.
Okay.
And I'd like to see greater self-sufficiency
Right.
in Gaza.
Right. Okay.
On your other part of your question, state it again, because I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, she was wondering about because there's like a lake like Lake Mead that's in Nevada. Lakes in the western states are usually drying up. Mississippi River had dried up. What is your do you believe like the salination plants that'll feed cities that dependent on those bodies of water?
Not just cities, like in California. I know that you have a lot of citizens there that don't want to have salinization, but there are safe ways to salinize water and also have renewable energy propagate the salinization program via solar power or what have you. They don't have to use fossil fuels to do it, which is what one of the concerns was, is not using fossil fuels. They're doing it in Australia right now. They're salinizing ocean water, and they're making arid climates be more lush and taking care of crops and things like that. And they're using renewable energy to do it. So it can be done. Do we want to do it? It's like an infrastructure. Do we want to put into that infrastructure in America for our benefit, or do we not?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right that that desalinization is a viable process. And going back to our earlier thing, actually Israel engages in some very substantial desalinization of water to provide agricultural water. So technologically it works, and in some circumstances it works efficiently economically, and the benefits are worth the cost. That said, I think that you have to look at desalinization in terms of costs and benefits, see how significant the actual cost of a particular plant in a particular place is, and have a measure of what the benefits are, and then compare that to other proposed solutions for solving the same problem. But I have no doubt that that desalinization is part of the mix. And I also have no doubt that that moving more forcefully to the solar power and maybe other renewable technologies is also certainly part of the mix as to how we get off of fossil fuels. And I also believe we have to be doing more at a more accelerated rate than we are. I think we probably have underestimated both the rapidity of climate change and climate-induced problems, and underestimated the magnitude of what's going to happen, even the magnitude of what's already happening. So, and probably, and we talk about it, the most common phrase that's used in talking about climate is that it's an existential problem. But I think the reality actually is that most people don't think of it the way we think about an existential problem. In many ways, that's rhetoric. If you think about how we reacted as a country to existential problems, what you'll see is a response that is totally different in scale than anything that's being even talked about. So example is that, an existential problem that we faced was after Pearl Harbor was bombed and Germany declared war on the United States, and we were in World War II. Well, so we're talking today about, limiting, gasoline consumption, right? So, how many cars Detroit put out between 1943 and the beginning of 1945 during World War II?
Zero.
450 cars.
I thought it was zero.
Basically zero. We went from millions to zero, right? Because we turned Detroit into something that was putting out, a bomber once a week, and was rebuilding the fleet and putting out, aircraft carriers and destroyers and battleships. And so that's an existential response. So we're not talking on that scale.
Okay.
So the reason why I was bringing that up is because I know that they say that California has a crisis, a financial crisis for the state, right? That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
But if they were able to create a salinization plant and then be able to put a pipeline to Nevada, to Utah, to Arizona, and arid states, right? That need that need that water, and can we do have some farmers here, but not a major amount of farmers. Same thing with Utah, but it could actually sustain all these cities, and they could make a very substantial amount of money for the state by doing that.
Yeah, I sometimes have a similar kind of speculation. Like sometimes we've got these floods in the Mississippi, and it's like, or in other parts of the country, and it's kind of like, well, why can't we have, gigantic canals or pipelines that would transfer excess water in some parts of the country to staggering shortages of water in other parts of the country?
Exactly.
And,
Priority though. We'll build those pipelines for fuel, but we're not going to build them for sustainability when it comes to water.
Yeah. Now the only good answer, if it's a good answer that I see with respect to that, is that when people actually sit down and do the actual cost benefit equations of what would it cost to build and run a gigantic water canal or pipeline, and what would be the value of the water coming out at the other end, that it turns out that the cost of doing it would be greater than the benefits. I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying that that before anybody, and it's legally also the case, that before you could actually build such a pipeline, it would have to be subject to a very careful cost-benefit analysis. And I don't know that it's ever been done. I don't know if it's ever been done. It's not one that ordinary people could do. You'd have to sort of, look.
I mean, we can't survive. We can survive without fossil fuel. You just ain't getting nowhere. However, you will die without water. So people need water.
Yeah, well,
cities need water.
Yeah, but there are different ways of putting it. I don't think the water should. We use so much water for agriculture compared to what we use for, drinking water, that the first thing to go, if we actually got into that kind of permanent dire water crisis, would be agriculture. Now that was no small thing. That would affect food prices and the economy and ways of life.
Both of which is sustainable, what you need to sustain your life. You need food, water, and shelter to sustain your life.
Yeah, I agree. So, like other things, and this may be an unsatisfactory answer to you, but I agree with the objectives. I'm interested in the proposed solution. But I don't know at this point whether it would stand up or wouldn't stand up to really careful analysis, and especially compared to any of the other alternatives that might be thought of.
Okay.
I wanted to say a lot when it comes to, how we're dealing with droughts. One way that you counter a drought is that you have actual foliage that are producing moisture into the air, and then it precipitates and it comes back down again. When you have arid states and places, of course it's not going to recycle itself because there's nothing to recycle. However, if you plant foliage and you have the water to initially start, you basically are building an ecosystem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I totally agree. And I'm a big, if you looked on my website, you'd see I have a proposal there for planting 300 million trees in the United States. And my perspective on it, it goes beyond the climate part of it and climate justice. It also has to do with beauty. If you lived in the Washington area, one of the things that you would discover in springtime is how beautiful the cherry trees are. And there's one neighborhood, a very expensive, fancy neighborhood, in which the cherry trees are so abundant that there's a long, long line of cars that drive into, it has a one main sort of U-shaped thoroughfare that has these cherry trees on both sides. And cars line up to just take a drive through this neighborhood when the cherries are in blossom. And I asked this question of why couldn't we have, with the same abundance, cherry trees and dogwood trees and so on, in the emaciated streets of Baltimore?
Yeah.
Why in the world? And so that's part of my beauty agenda. And, I talk about graceful simplicity, which is the name of one of my books. And part of what I argue in that is that beauty is one of the human needs, along with food and housing and so on. That beauty is fundamental to the good life. And I'm interested in social policies that will promote beauty in all sorts of environments. And planting flowering trees, it seems to me an easy...
And planting trees that actually provide food for the people. You know what I'm saying?
Right, actually. And
not just a tree that just grows and absorbs water, but something that is functional. It has a purpose.
Yeah, we're very much in sync on that. And I actually get very specific. I talk about nectarine trees. Because they grow very easily, like peaches. But they're absolutely fabulous. And commercial nectarines, unlike peaches, you can hardly find a really good commercial nectarine. And what's really funny is that about 6 months ago, I visited some really remarkable, sort of in a poor neighborhood in Baltimore, some really remarkable community institution that owned a very good property that had been a church at one point. And to my delight, they were growing nectarines in their backyard.
I planted lemon and lime trees here, and they're very hard to grow. But I figured, I don't want to plant a tree that's not giving me anything. I need something that's going to give me something.
And it's also very good for young people, that experience. In fact, it's astonishing.
It is.
That you can grow something that tastes great, like a good tomato. Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
But you can't get tomatoes in arid places because they need a lot of moisture, and in order to protect the moisture in those tomato plants, you have to have trees. You have to have other things that are producing moisture in that ecostructure.
You may be right commercially, but you can grow tomatoes that'll knock you out in a flower pot.
No, I get that, but it takes a lot of work to be able to do that. Where, as opposed to if you have good trees that are creating moisture in that area, you're giving back without having to overly. Because I know I used to grow tomatoes. It takes a lot of water in Nevada to grow a tomato. Like, I'm talking about watering 3 to 4 times a day in the hot summer.
Let's say you've got a flower pot with a 10-inch diameter at the top, right? How much water would you put into that on a daily basis?
At least a gallon, more than a gallon.
A gallon a day?
Yes, in Nevada, the soil dries out so fast.
Well, I'd put a lot of mulch. At any rate, we differ on tomato growing.
No, but if you were here, you would know, because we get to 120 degrees. There's no moisture. There's no moisture here.
Maybe, but every place isn't 120 degrees. That's the outlier.
Right. Oh, so anyway, any more questions? Because I'm about to conclude this.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. I'm still a little tired myself.
Thank you for your what you believe will be a beneficial thing for the United States or in politics in your arena. I appreciate it. I appreciate the conversation.
Sure, and thanks for the opportunity. It's good.
All right.
All
right.
Thanks, Big J.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Pierre. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Segal, for dropping by, and I wish you luck in the next month.
Send me a link to how somebody could listen to this.
It's gonna be on Rumble. I'm gonna put it on Rumble, and I might put this on. I'm gonna put this on Rumble.
Just send me how to access it.
Let me. I'll go ahead. Well, it's not live right now. I'm just going to put it.
He hasn't put it up yet.
I ain't put on live yet.
Yeah, just tell me how at some point anybody who wants to hear it can access it.
Okay, I give you the link. I'll email you the link when I finish.
Very good.
You're right. When
That's
I finish,
awesome, Big J.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna do that.
Okay,
All right.
thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Yeah.
All right. Thank
All
you,
right.
y'all. All
Okay,
right.
bye-bye.
All right. Bye bye. And this concludes my this concludes the interview with Mr. Jerome Segal, 2024 presidential candidate for the Democratic Party. And I'll see y'all next time. And I'm out. Peace.